Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Youthcast. Today is the 6th of October. It's a Thursday and we have a full house today.
Yes.
For once.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
Ammar has appeared.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's been about a month, I think. Last time I was in was during the summer holidays. So inshallah, today's show goes good.
Yeah, we've got a lot of
Yeah.
varying opinions today.
Yeah.
And we'll have a very interesting talk. But as usual, we're going to introduce what we're going to talk about today. It's obviously something that I'm sure that a lot of people have been, hearing about in the news, have been quite worried, that the economic crisis in this country has been a very hot topic in recent times. A lot of people are worried about the effects of this economic crisis, what the government's doing to tackle it, and we'll just share our own opinions on this. So I'd just like to put it out to all of you. What's your understanding on what's going on so far? Let's give a bit of context to the listeners that maybe don't know exactly some of the nuances and details of this topic.
I mean, it's a really interesting topic. Of course, the news can be quite scary, and it is in many ways scary to many people. The general sort of outlook is that I believe 2 weeks ago now, perhaps slightly less than 2 weeks ago, the government put out what was regarded as, or what was called a mini budget, but by many people, it wasn't much of a mini budget at all. It was quite a big budget, and it sort of outlined a complete U-turn in government approach at what was been dubbed the sort of growth outcome. And the idea behind it is simply that cutting, it was centered on cutting taxes, cutting red tape, and cutting benefits, and using loans and such to be able to subsidize all of that. And the idea was, if the economy grows, then over time, even though there'll be a short-term decrease in tax income and a short-term decrease in public spending, over time, when more investment comes in because of these lower taxes and etc., it will cause a boom in the economy, which will then cause an increase in the lives of the people of the UK.
Pretty much exactly what you said. So from my understanding, Liz Truss, our Prime Minister, so exactly what you said. So she's reducing taxation across the board, but mainly for the highest tax bracket. And the ideology behind it is that by doing that, you cause people to invest more in industry, which eventually generates more capital for everyone across the board.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Wealth bracket. But what we're seeing currently is that that's not actually happening. And we're seeing that those tax cuts to people earning the most are actually more detrimental to the economy.
Yeah, what we've seen most directly is that the financial markets, at least in the short term, have been very unconvinced by Liz Truss and her plans. And so what we saw was a complete collapse of the pound to the point where for a short period it was almost directly tied with the dollar, which is something quite unprecedented.
Even interest rates. I don't know what percentage you're at.
Interest rates
on that, but it's very high.
Yeah, and I think so. What the government, sorry, not the government, the Bank of England has done to try and counteract this directly has been the government, the Bank of England, has bought bonds, and what this has done is, generally speaking, helped the economy and put a bit more trust into the current UK economy and environment, and that has pulled the pound back up recently. And to further this as well, Liz Truss has, as I'm sure we'll discuss, pulled back on some of her commitments and ideas, and we'll talk about that. That has garnered a bit more trust into the pound and the UK economy, which has been reflected in the pound coming back up, although the economy in general is still not seen as to be in good shape. And related to this is actually a study I read from the London School of Economics, which looked over a wide range of Western countries, and Canada, America, New Zealand, the UK,
Australia.
Australia, these countries, and they looked over these countries and they basically looked at times where taxes were cut
Mhm.
for the richest, and they wanted to see basically
If
did that
economic growth happened.
cause economic growth. And the basic consensus of the study was that no, it increased inequality, it increased the amount of money that rich people had, but this money was not in turn invested into the country, and it did not see growth from that. So
Very
it's-
interesting. So like we have the empirical evidence that cutting taxes for the rich doesn't actually increase
Or at least-
the boom of the economy. So
at
that
least
does
in- yeah.
raise a sort of interesting conversation. What do we all think of tax as a concept?
Oh, I think taxes, in a weird way, controversial. There are many people that like to argue it's my money.
Yeah, you have two
I
sides
made
of the
this money.
spectrum.
Yeah.
You have one side saying taxation is complete theft, and then on the other side you say taxation is essential and completely necessary for public spending to help with schools, hospitals, just in general things that the public need.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, as I'm sure many of the viewers and the people here
Mhm.
can guess, I'm very understanding of the idea of what tax is and its necessity. So I would be on that latter half.
Yeah,
And the reason for that is when someone will proclaim that I've made this money, the government cannot take away this money. My question to him is, would you have made that money if you did not have education?
that's very true.
Would you have made that money if there were no public roads? Would you have made that money if, etc., if there wasn't a hospital around, etc., etc., etc.? All the money we supposedly made, I don't believe we really did make. It's more, of course, we did have a hand in the fact that it accrued within us and with us, but it would not have. It also required the help and work of thousands and millions and a whole economy and a whole government around us, which allowed for that to happen. If you do not allow the government and, in fact, support the government and ensure that the government continues these services, usually through taxation, then all of that would collapse.
That's true.
And if all of that collapses, then you can go tell me
Society
I've made my money
crumbles.
myself. Then you can come tell me I've made my money myself.
What do
If
you
you
think,
go,
Austin?
yeah,
I think it's a valid point, but a lot of the issues that a lot of people have with taxes, yeah, fine, I agree, because if you think about what tax is used for, a lot of it is to just sustain those institutions that Tarek was talking about, for example. So the roads, the NHS, for example, etc., etc. But then you see a lot of times tax money is used for reasons which are not as ethical
yeah,
Or as
yeah,
necessary,
or as necessary as some people would consider.
like
So
military spending.
military
yeah, that's a big
spending.
thing.
So if you look at countries who have a very large military spending, a lot of people who are maybe more on the against war pacifist side of things, who don't agree with war, they'd argue that
Yeah,
I'm earning this money, obviously with the help of government institutions, but I'm then contributing towards something that I don't morally agree with. So that's, I guess,
Yeah.
that would be a point of view to argue against that, I guess.
That's actually a really good point. Something I hadn't previously considered. And taking that into account, I would say that from that point of view, from the point of view that I don't want to support these institutions, for example, here in the UK and the West in general, we have the idea of the military industrial complex, where there's a constant need, where there's a constant push for war and military, because it's a self-fulfilling cycle where military companies lobby governments to increase military spending, which will then allow for them to lobby governments more, etc., etc. That sort of institution and processes, I don't think many people support. And I think many of them will say, I don't want my tax dollars going to this or tax pounds going to this. And that's actually a very valid claim. I think from that point of view, if someone was to convince me that I don't want to pay taxes for that reason, and I think, I guess in that case, it's not the institution of tax itself, though. That is a
The
problem.
state.
It's the state
We're
that you
consenting
have
to the
to live in.
state to use our tax money for whatever they please, essentially, because when we vote for them, we don't actually get a say in what the spending goes towards. That's their decision, and we just obviously get the taxation is just cut from our salaries. But it's interesting because if you actually look at the global charts, you see that what is widely considered like probably the most booming economies in the world, So we're talking about the Scandinavian countries, and they're booming in not just economy, in other factors as well. So we're talking Sweden, Norway, Denmark, etc. And you see that they actually have the highest rates of taxation globally. Like it's insane rates. If we had them in the UK, people would go mad. So, and you notice that even though they have these absolutely ridiculous rates of taxation, the country is still completely booming. Like you have low rates of crime, high rates of economy. A lot of housing is available. So it's interesting that societies can be so different based on a measure such as taxation.
Yeah,
I think, yeah,
I think it links to what we said before about what government's in charge. If you look at the governments that are in charge of Scandinavia, they obviously have their ideas in the right place. And even if you look at countries like that, largely they have a consensus among the general public and amongst governments, etc., etc. So there isn't much of an issue. But if you look at a country like the UK, for example, there isn't that consensus. There's always that sort of conflictive environment, you could say, where it's always, if you look at government politics, and if you look at the general public, if we just talking generally, we don't have that level of consensus and that level of agreement, you could say, in this country for something like that to be possible. And if you look at also spending, for example, a lot of that money that is taxed is put back into the country in order for it to sustain itself.
I think something that's not focused on as much is the ways to improve the economy other than just taxing, because I think tax in and of itself is not the primary way that governments should affect policy. It's not government spending primarily. I think there's certain laws and institutions and programs that the government can undertake
Yeah.
which will have a direct, invaluable effect on people's lives,
Okay.
which won't cost any tax dollars, or at least a considerable amount of tax. I think one of this, for example, is supporting unions. If you support unions, the workers have more bargaining power.
Yeah, that's true.
If they have more bargaining power, they will attain higher wages and better working rights. That is what has been seen throughout history, and it's what has afforded us a lot of our working rights today. So supporting programs like that and movements like that is one way where you can improve the lives of people without giving them money, without taxing them more, without holding back the economy,
exactly.
as some people would say.
So you see, with the Conservative Party, they've historically been majorly against trade unions, like you were saying, especially during the Thatcherite era.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the economy. So interestingly, what do we think about the concept of? So obviously we know what we call the American dream. So i.e., you work your way up. So you don't claim handouts. You work your way up from the bottom, and you essentially hard work can get you whatever you want. It's quite an interesting concept. I think a lot of people hold disagreements towards it. The fact, mainly because of how significant the divide is between the wealth classes. So obviously there's a cycle of poverty. So if you look at the most impoverished states in the USA, or even just areas, most of them. So the cause of the poverty cycle that is literally impossible to escape is the fact that you have quite sub-tier schools that don't achieve good results because of how little funding they receive. Then that causes high crime rates because children aren't being educated, or as well as the fact that the area just isn't receiving funding into like policing and stuff like that. And then that cycle just keeps continuing on, where the lack of funding causes lack of schools and lack of education and lack of other essentials to a society, which causes high rates of crime. And it's very impossible to sort of escape that poverty cycle without getting help from somewhere. Because okay, so I'll bring this to the table. What do we think about the concept of individualism? An individual can work their way up to become a millionaire.
I think it's a myth.
Yeah.
I think the American dream in and of itself is a myth.
Yeah.
If you look at the institutions, etc., in this country and in general, just Western capitalist societies, it's just a lie. If we're being truly honest, the ability that everyone, because if you look at the American dream, it makes the assumption that everybody is on the same playing field,
yeah,
and that every possible way to attain success that is sort of marked by the American dream is attainable for all, which is not exactly true. Because especially if you look at a country like America and this country itself, the wealth divide has never so showed signs of decreasing or slowing down, for example. There's always that sort of idea of, how people start, they're born into families, etc., with more money. You know, if we're talking about what we're talking about now, the tax cuts, how, they've been more beneficial to the people who are more wealthy.
Yeah.
It's that whole idea of all social institutions just clouding that. And what you're talking about before about sort of poverty as well, if you look at how impoverished some certain areas are, and how that is probably one of the biggest factors, if not the biggest factor, of why crime ensues. The idea of an American dream, I think, is just a sort of way to maybe make people a bit more delusional as
Hmm.
to maybe that they can achieve something like
Yeah.
that. But it's just a way to maintain that sort of power divide.
Yeah,
my
that's
opinion.
true. That's
Yeah.
I
true.
very much agree.
I think
We agree on something.
Yeah, we do. We agree on something.
We actually agree on a lot more than we think.
Yeah.
Often we do.
Listeners, also, maybe I haven't really mentioned this. What are your opinions on this? We have actually had one comment
Oh, okay.
from someone who obviously is was commenting on what we were talking about before about tax, and was saying, he agrees with tax, but obviously doesn't agree with the fact that how it supplies wars, military,
Yeah,
etc.
yeah,
etc.
yeah.
So we
I
had one
think
comment on
I
that.
think that's agreeing with
But,
a lot of us here.
yeah. Also, listeners, if you'd like to comment on anything else we're talking about, what we're talking about currently, about the American dream, please do let us know. You can message on 0777948182 and we will respond.
Even
So,
if we look
back
at
to our conversation.
so even if we look at like mainstream media, you see how the narrative of the American dream is just it's just very much out there. People think that the notion that one can build themselves up from the very bottom towards the higher echelons of society.
yeah.
And I think the fact that the concept is quite popularized.
The American sorry.
Yeah, Karen.
I mean, the American dream itself is false because the literal definition of the American dream is that everyone has an equal opportunity to have success. When from the ground up, the playing field,
It's
as
just
Mohsen
completely
said,
untrue, exactly.
yeah, it's not even balanced. There's people on two opposite sides of the spectrum. People like refugees, people from the borders, as you said earlier, education systems, policing, like everything is on different levels. Everyone has different opportunities to begin with. People live in areas with higher crime rates. Other people live in more security tight areas. People have more money to be sent to private schools. Others have to go to state schools. Also, teaching levels are different because of pay rates in different areas and states. So like the whole idea of the American dream, it's more a saying rather than an actual doing thing.
Even if we so obviously we're talking about the American dream. Even if we move it back to the UK, you have some of the most impoverished areas socially and economically. So we're talking like Glasgow, Blackpool. So what you have is these areas have the least amount of public spending and funding that goes into them. So you have really low rates of highly educated people and the people that are so if I move it to Luton, let me ask this. Okay, so let's say you're living in Luton, right? We're all living in Luton. Would you want to, let's say you were highly educated and you were going to start a family, would you buy a house in Luton? Or would you rather move out?
I would rather move out if I could afford it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting that you say that because what you're seeing is because people aren't moving into these sort of areas that are socially and economically disadvantaged, people are wanting to move out into these better areas if they're highly educated with like university degrees. Because we're seeing a lot of that, the areas get a lot less public spending that is situated on them, which causes again a wealth divide in those areas.
I think that especially goes to places up north, like place like Bradford, Sheffield, those areas up north, because they used to be like the place where where all the money was coming in because of the steel factories there and all the mining facilities that they had there. Where nowadays everything's gone down south, all the spending's gone into London, surrounding areas and stuff like that. Whereas we have all this land up north, and if you go up north now, you can buy a house for 40k, 80k. When you come down south, it goes up to like, and you enter 1 foot into London, anywhere near central London, one bedroom flat would go to the millions. And the fact that they're not providing the same equality in economy, places up north and stuff like that, then also imbalances opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think housing is a big thing that you brought up here because, interestingly, of course, housing is a big part of what the American dream is part of.
Yeah, that's true.
It's the idea of, you grow up, you work really hard, you buy yourself a house, you have a wife, you have 2 kids,
Yeah,
you have
nuclear
yourself a
family.
car, you have the nuclear family, etc., etc., white picket fence, all of this sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is
In a
of
nice
course
suburban area.
nice suburban area. It's quite a cliche now to say the American dream is dead.
Yeah.
It's quite cliched, but some like direct representations of this is we talk a lot about inflation here in this country, especially nowadays, but it's quite interesting that the topic of inflation of the housing prices is never not as directly discussed. That's because it's utterly abysmal.
True.
The housing prices today are doubling every 10 years.
Yeah.
The rate of house price increase is astronomical.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the old measure for inflation, I believe I forgot the direct name, but the older measure of inflation used to take into account rent prices, for example, house prices. The newer measure of inflation that the government uses nowadays does not take that into account. And interestingly, of course, that yields a lower inflation rate.
Yeah.
And the house prices as a function of say the minimum wage, or as a function of the average wage, it is becoming larger and larger and larger and larger. I mean, if you see that graph, for example,
Yeah.
of house prices and then
People's wages.
it probably started off something like this, and then went.
Just
and
explain that for the viewers. who
Yeah,
can't see.
yeah. Sorry about that. The gap between them,
Yeah.
between house prices and wages is constantly increasing,
That's true.
I ever increasing rate. And I think one of the most interesting facts that I've learned most recently was the idea that around 20% of housing in the UK, not in London, in the UK in general, is owned by foreign investors.
Yeah.
Around 20%.
Wow.
I believe the exact number is 17, 18, but of course it varies. That was an older figure and it increases year by year. So around 20% of housing in the UK is owned by foreign investors. Now, I'm personally quite opposed to the idea of the modern concept of private property and the way it's been
Interesting. Okay.
structured. So to go into more depth in that, the idea that someone, say, from Dubai or Russia, who has made millions, say, from the oil in his country, or as an oligarch in Russia from his backing of the government, for example, or etc. Any other means, can come in and buy a house in London and deprive Londoners, British people, of that same house.
True. Yeah.
And
Okay, so is that more related to foreign?
not just
ownership?
foreign. Even the 20% figure is simply foreign. But if you were to talk about in general private ownership, there are companies out there, individuals out there who own thousands of houses,
Yeah.
and they rent them out. And let's be honest, rent as an institution is quite exploitative.
Yeah. That's true.
Everyone would prefer, practically speaking, everyone would prefer to buy a home
Yeah. Yeah.
if it was for adequate pricing.
Mm.
And so it's a sort of, and everyone needs housing. Housing is a human right. So it's almost forcing. It's quite extortionate.
Yeah. Even like from an Islamic perspective, any interest-based economy is just simply evil. Like profiting off interest. Like if we look back to like the 7th century when we had the rightly guided caliphs, we saw that they actually established, I think it was Sayyidina Umar, who actually established the first welfare state. And that was the first time the world has ever seen something as extraordinary as that. And I think it's interesting that the West has the economic model of the West is so absolutely abysmal to the point where you have the wealth divide is just so catastrophically massive and it's just widening by the day.
I think related to what you brought about Islam, because it's a very interesting topic. I try to bring this up whenever I can, because when I heard of this, it was quite interesting, and it sort of it sort of built up my distaste for the modern economic system. And it was a couple of things. First of all, you've probably heard of the story of I believe, Abu Bakr, who at the time was a Khalif, of course, and he was out with his servant at the time, and they were sort of surveying the local area. They were in the outskirts of the center, so there weren't many people around, and they see a sort of fire in the distance, and they approached this fire looking to see who was there. And I think we're running out of time soon, so we'll carry on the story later.
Yeah, we've got around 20 seconds left. Sorry to interject there, Tarek, but we will carry on that story after the
I'm
break.
quite curious to hear it.
Yeah, I'm also quite curious to hear it. I think it'll be a good story to add to what we've been talking about, and hopefully, listeners, there's been a very insightful conversation, and we will see you after the break, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
This program will continue after the break. Continue listening to Inspire FM. Inspire FM.
Inspire 105.1 FM.
Remember to make time for Allah every day. You are listening to Inspire FM.
مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا.
Because Muhammad ﷺ was the chosen messenger of the word of God through the divine revelations, Muslims from all walks of life should strive to follow his example.
Did you see that guy on TV?
What, that no comment guy?
Yeah, he was sick. What was his name?
I think it was Atiq Malik.
Yeah, Atiq Malik of Liberty Law Solicitors. Atiq Malik heads up the criminal law team at Liberty Law Solicitors, specialising in everything from serious crime down to road traffic offences.
To find out more or for a free telephone consultation, call 01582 459955.
Liberty Law, there when you need us most.
Crescent Hall, a large, elegant venue in the heart of Luton. As well as a grand banqueting hall, Crescent Hall provides you with kitchen facilities, a bridal room, a family room, as well as a prayer room. Ideal for conferences, weddings, mehndi and engagement parties. We have ample parking for guests. Our rates are highly competitive. Contact us today for a personalised quote. Call us on 01582 72 33 86. For further information, visit us at www.crescenthall.co.uk or email us at info@crescenthall.co.uk. Crescent Hall, adding comfort and style to your event.
अगर आप अकाउंट्स या टैक्स की वजह से परेशान हैं तो घबराने की कोई बात नहीं। आज ही मुकम्मल राजदारी से हमारे साथ अपने तमाम मसाइल, बुक कीपिंग, पेरोल, वीएटी, टैक्सी अकाउंट्स, लिमिटेड कंपनी बनाना वगैरह के लिए राब्ता कायम कीजिए। हमारे मशवरे और खिदमत से आपको खुशी और तसल्ली महसूस होगी। याद रखें, अब्दुल कयूम ऑफ ए कयूम अकाउंटेंट्स लिमिटेड, 4A वॉल्डेक रोड, लूटन। Telephone 01582 755252. Mobile 07961 188616. Email aq.accountants@hotmail.co.uk.
Did you know that over 361,000 children die every year due to lack of clean water? Clean water is not a luxury, but a basic human right. UKIM is working to end their suffering by providing clean and safe water. This Ramadan, make a difference. Provide clean and safe water with UKIM. For donations, call now or visit ukim.org.
Hello, my name is Nicola and I'm an information and signpost advisor at Luton Food Bank. I'm going to give you quick wins to save energy, make it a family affair, play energy saving games with your kids and get them trained in spotting where energy is being wasted and lights, switches and appliances have been left on. If you'd like further information and advice, or you or someone you know requires help from Luton Food Bank, please get in touch either through our website or our social media. Thank you.
Inspire FM is excited to release a new show, Luton Weekly, an exciting new segment bringing you weekly updates from all over Bedfordshire. Join me, Anesa, as I bring you the latest in our community each week. Do you have an exciting story or event you would like to share? If so, reach out to us via email on news@inspirefm.org. Luton Weekly, airing every Friday at 5:30 p.m, only on Inspire 105.1 FM.
From the studios of Inspire FM, the time is now 7:30.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the Youthcast. We are joined today by Ammar, Tariq,
Assalamu
and
alaikum.
Razin.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Wa alaikum assalam. We've got a full house today, and the first half of the show, we had a very interesting discussion about a couple of things. We're talking about in general about the economic crisis that we're facing currently in this country, how the governments have been dealing with it, and other past sort of iterations and versions of, schemes brought forward by the government. So we talked about the American dream, for example, how we think of it as a myth. We also talked about, taxation, for example, our opinions on taxation. And lastly, we had an anecdote
Yes.
from Tariq.
Yeah.
So please do continue. I cut you off before the break.
As I was saying, we were talking about sort of almost the duty of the country. What is it, the duty of the leader? Individualism versus, community focus. And we were talking about taxes and what is it that a state should do, etc., etc. And so something that links very well to this, and because we brought up as well Islamic anecdotes as well, is Abu Bakr, as I was saying, him and his servant were sort of surveying the local area, and they were in the sort of outskirts. So not many people knew this area. They were just, as a good caliph would probably do, and they come across a woman. They come across a fire in the distance, and they approach the fire to see who it is. What's happening, and they see a woman with, like, I believe, a couple of kids, and the kids are crying. They're in clear pain and anguish, and the woman is stirring a pot of hot water.
I've heard of this story.
You probably have. Sorry?
It's actually saying the wrong word.
Omar, sorry, I apologize. Omar, I apologize. And so obviously he sees this woman, and he says to the woman, what's the issue? And the children are crying, or she tells him that the children are crying because they're starving, and that she doesn't have food to feed them.
And can I?
Yeah, of course.
So the reason why she was actually stirring the pot was so the kids would at least think that she was preparing food, because the pot was actually completely just full of rocks. It wasn't even food.
Yeah.
So just because of the audible noise of stirring a pot, she thought it would give them at least some hope that they would get something. And it was just a completely saddening situation for Umar. And he was, upon seeing this, he actually established child welfare trusts, so a child never goes starving. So just from that, he was. You look at the examples of the Khalifs in history, and especially the rightly guided, and you just see how absolutely astonishing the character was. Like, what do you think that our leaders today would have any sort of not even just an inch of the same caliber of humanity or character?
I think more specifically, and this is the thing that I wanted to highlight, is when he did this, when he saw this, of course, he went into the center of the city, went to the sort of storage that they had, and he put on his own back, the sort of food that he was going to bring to her. And his servant said to him, let me hold that for you, because he's a servant. That's part of what his job is to do. And he said, will you hold this burden for me on the day of judgment? And this is the interesting thing, is that what is the burden of the ruler?
Yeah.
And part of the burden of the ruler that Omar saw on that day, and what I assume, as you said, he implemented later, was that the burden of the leader is to ensure the well-being of the people that they rule over. And specifically, something else that the woman said to Omar was that she didn't realize it was Omar. Because of course it's before the age of technology and etc. And she said, this is Omar's fault, basically.
Yeah. So she was actually cursing him.
Yeah, she was cursing Omar, and Omar, who was there, but of course she didn't know it was Omar, told her how can you blame Omar when Omar doesn't know about you? And the point is, she said to him, how can Omar not know about me when he rules over me? It's your job to know about us.
Exactly.
And what links to this as well, and in terms of economics, is a hadith from Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's 4 things, I believe he said, and if my recollection serves me well, should be collectively owned. And the idea of collective ownership today is in many ways a taboo. But these 4 things should be collectively owned: the fire, the water, and 3 things, and the marsh, sort of the ungrown crops. So the ungrown crops in terms of the crops that have grown in and of themselves. So, in certain areas, you find, a tree that has grown. No one has planted it. No one has watered it. It's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's sort of grown. And it's these sort of things that should be collectively owned. So the fire today can be quite commonly sort of projected, because of course we don't use direct fire. We use oil. We use electricity, fuel. These sort of things can be projected as what is the modern extensions of that. So that should be collectively owned. If you look at water today, it's privately owned. If you look at energy today, privately owned. Land today and the plants that are on it, all privately owned.
To add to that, under the Muslim Khalifa, there would be a ruling that if you owned a piece of land that was unused, and it wasn't, and so it could be used for agriculture or for some way in helping the economy, and you didn't use it within a period of, I think it was around 2 years, then you'd have to give that back to the community, which then which would help boost the economy.
Yeah, so that's called ushur, land tax.
Yeah.
So we've obviously mentioned Umar, who just bringing it back to you. I do have actually another story which links in quite like nicely to the character of a leader. So during the Umar's caliphate, when the Muslims actually conquered Persia at the time, so Persia was under Byzantine rule, which is the remnants of the Roman Empire. So they actually conquered it through. It wasn't a bloody warfare. It was through peaceful. It was a peaceful treaty. So the Byzantines actually agreed to hand over power. They recognized that Umar was their new leader, essentially. So then they said they would only agree to that if he himself would come to Persia from Mecca, which was obviously the capital.
I think Persia at the time was under the Persians.
No, it was actually Byzantine.
I think if according to what I understand is that at the time there were two big powers. There were the Persians, the Sassanids, and
the Byzantine. So I think
you might be talking about Palestine and Jerusalem. There's a very similar story with Palestine and Abu Bakr.
No, this is definitely Umar.
No, I think it was about Palestine, but it was Umar.
Okay, so it was Palestine. Yeah.
It was Palestine and thing.
So the Palestine was obviously under Byzantine control. Now the Byzantine rulers, they actually said, okay, so we'll accept the terms of your treaty if Umar himself actually comes to Palestine and agrees it in person.
Yeah, it's Umar. Yeah, it's Umar.
So he went, and you'd think a leader would bring like a massive grand show, like how you see like Kings and Queen of England, how their like coronation is just a massive grand parade, a dog and pony show. And Umar actually came with just him and his one servant and one camel, and he was literally wearing like normal clothes, like obviously it's Arabs in the desert, so he's wearing like rags with like minimal footwear, just like general clothes that an everyday person would wear. And it is not what you would expect of like a Khalif, because the Byzantines would think, okay, he's going to come with like gold ornaments with like a massive army of horses everywhere. Okay, so when they come, they see, okay, so Umar and his servant comes to Palestine. Also, in the actual journey itself, they actually rationed out who would be sitting on the horse. So sometimes Umar would be sitting on the horse and the servant would be carrying the things, and then they'd switch. So Umar would be carrying the things and the servant would be on the horse. So when they eventually got to Palestine, and Umar obviously sees the Muslims around, they're obviously all greeting him, hugging him and stuff like that, because they're seeing their friend, who's the Khalif, of course. And then the Byzantines, they see this and they're like, who's this guy that's coming? Because they don't know he's the Khalif, obviously. They see this guy that's coming to Palestine and everyone seems to love him straight away. So they're thinking, who is this guy that just came out of nowhere? And then someone tells them, oh, he's Umar, the Khalif. And then they're like, they are so shocked that a normal guy is just already, he looks like a regular person, and he's just helping out, and everyone seems to love him, because in their minds, well, the typical leader or monarch or Khalif would have, any sort of ruler historically, they've just been very like ostentatiously dressed or ostentatiously
presented.
Exactly.
And
so
to add to that, also when they did enter into Palestine, the servant was actually on the camel at the time. So when he entered, and they asked which one is the Khalif, the servant pointed down to Umar. And
imagine what a sight that would be for the servant to be on the horse and the ruler of the entire Islamic Empire at the point to be the one carrying the actual belongings.
And I mean that Umar radiallahu anh, he took the Khalifa after Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's passing,
Mm.
at the point where the Islamic Caliphate was growing at
Exponential rate.
a crazy rate, and the fact that he was in rags, he wasn't showing off his wealth.
Yeah.
He looked equally
like everyone else.
Yeah, like everyone else, and he still had one of the most powerful empires in
the world at that point.
in the Middle East, like in the entire world, is something that
And
no
then
leader
if we
today
look at
could do.
leaders, world leaders today, do you think they even? Okay, obviously I mentioned this in the last segment, but I would not even say that they even come like a mile close to the level of character that the rightly guided caliphs and the Islamic leaders during that time period had. So
yeah, I think it says a lot. It says a lot because it's quite, and the truth is, it's almost common sense. You know, if you sort of try to take yourself out of the society we've been brought up in,
yeah,
the idea of helping a woman out and the leader's job being helping his subjects,
yeah,
that is, you know, common
lost in
sense.
society.
It's what you'd expect to happen.
Yeah,
of course, it's amazing that it did happen.
Yeah,
but it's sort of it's crazy that hearing of these stories and of these people of the servant being of a similar prestige in that journey, for example, to his leader, of, for example, leaders and rulers not wearing ostentatious things. It's so foreign and unreal to
it's
us.
like alien to us to even
Because
comprehend that.
we in our own mind, all we've seen is leaders being utterly greedy and etc.
Even like if we even look past like the way they like present themselves and the way they dress and stuff like that, even just looking at their policies, you can just see that their policies are like just geared towards the making the rich richer.
And I think a beautiful thing about the Islamic Caliphate is that the tax that they would take from the people wouldn't be used for the government or the monarchy. It would be used back to the people, because they didn't have tax like we have it today, like 40% of your entire wealth would go towards the government, helping helping like the monarchy, the kings and the queens with their lavish houses, and then also the other necessities that we need tax for. But their taxes would go only towards benefiting the citizens. And also like land tax, as you said, because of those that aren't using the agricultural land, and all of it just like was a full circle, and it all led back to the welfare of the citizens and those who are inside of it, and not just the head of states.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You know, a leader's job is to lead by example, and a lot of, even if you look at Muslim leaders of this world,
yeah, of course,
all values, any sort of attempt at any sort of welfare for the people has been lost.
Yeah,
has been lost in
very
greed,
fancy.
wealth, because a lot of the times these leaders have very, very close ties with the people, the elites, for example, and it's all about benefiting themselves.
Corporate
and the
greed,
idea,
politics,
the whole definition of what a leader has or what a leader is has been changed. So, you know, a lot of leaders, if you look at if, for example, Saudi Arabia is a big topic in recent times, if you look at the leadership system there and how it is so far away from what you would consider Islamic.
Even in Pakistan nowadays as well.
Any country, any major country, to be honest, if we're talking about Islamic countries, you know, that whole idea of secularism has just been, it's infected these countries so severely. And yeah, I think definitely that's something to consider.
Yeah, so obviously we've been talking about Islamic rulers and their character, and just how we have the difference between now and then. And in the last segment, we were talking about taxation, the concept of taxation in general. Are you right there? Right, fair enough. Okay,
I'm good now. Sorry about
obviously in last segment we were talking about taxation and individualism. So now I want to bring this up. This sort of just came to mind. So we've been talking about the idea of the sort of cycle of poverty, where people aren't going to as good schools, and therefore crime rates are increasing and stuff like that. So now, what do we think? If we had the money, would you guys send your kids to private school?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not? It's going to benefit them. Obviously, it's something that is very selfish, self-centered, but obviously, like we were talking about this during the break as well, and I would agree with what Tarek said. I don't agree with the whole institution of private schools, because what it does is just increases that divide. If we're talking not even in terms of monetary value, in terms of cultures, everything, it just programs
Okay,
people to increase that divide. But obviously, it's a dog eat dog world.
So just on that, okay, so I see your mentality. So you disagree with the philosophy of private schools.
So if I was in charge and I was
because-
controlling, I'd abolish it. But if it's a outright benefit towards my child, why not?
It's just the way it is.
I mean, I think there's two ways to look at it. You can look at sort of the way it looks to other people and the sort of
social stigma.
The stigma, not even the stigma around it, just the sort of the what it is you seem to be supporting, and then you can also look at what the actual positives and negatives of it are. There's two options. There's either you don't send your child to a private school, and well done, you don't seem to be supporting. You aren't seen to be supporting the institution, but you're not gonna abolish the institution just by that action. You're not gonna harm the institution just by that action. You're not even gonna affect it in any way. But your child may have a worse education. Or you can do it the other way. You can accept that, okay, look, the fact that this institution exists gives me the ability to use it. I'm going to allow my child the ability and the privilege, obviously, to attend this institution. And the institution won't grow because of you. It won't become larger. You won't directly aid in the institution. It's not. Just because you could sort of look at it in just in terms of the two outcomes. It's either way, the institution doesn't matter. Private schools still exist.
I don't think with private schools, I don't think it's all dependent about being rich and getting into that private school because of your money. I think with private schools, the way it works is that you have to be also educationally capable. Because okay, let me give you this example. I think it was David Beckham's son. He wanted to get into haberdashers, and that's one of the best private schools in England.
Okay.
At the moment, he didn't get into the school no matter how much money his wife offered. I think they were even offering to build an entire swimming pool or something like that just so his son could get in, and that costs hundreds of thousands of pounds to install a swimming pool, all these facilities. And even then, they didn't allow for him to enter the school because he's not as educationally capable as the other students.
Okay, fair enough. So,
but doesn't he still go to a private school? He still goes to a private school.
Yeah, so obviously...
He didn't get into that one, but he still goes to a private school.
There is nuance to what we're saying. So obviously, exceptions don't break the rule. And the rule is that going to private schools automatically just put you on an advantage. Even if you're not that... Okay, so... There's another debate to be had: nature versus nurture. Where does intellect come from? Let's assume that it is nurture. So you're taught. Well, that's what the general consensus is. That you're taught.
Well, it's a mix. It's a mix. Everyone agrees that there's at least some part of it's nurture.
Okay, yeah, that's true. But if we're going off what you said, so it's a mix. People who go to private schools just naturally have the better opportunities because the spending is there, the teaching facilities are there, just everything is there to increase your ability for the future. And you're also even going beyond that. Let's say you're not that educationally capable. The networking you make there, the friends you make
that's what I was going to mention.
For life will literally will reap the rewards for you. And if we compare that to state schools, which aren't obviously based on you obviously don't pay to get in, they aren't based on competition, so anyone can go to a state school essentially. What you see is that because they don't have the same amount of spending because it's from taxpayers' money, obviously the facilities are going to be weaker than said private schools. Now, bringing it back to what we said before about would we send our own children to private schools, Mohsin obviously says yes, he would, because it obviously has the benefit, even though you believe the concept of it is kind of like bad in the sense. But okay, let me bring up the devil's advocate point of view. What do you think about the sort of social aspect of private school in the sense where you're sort of sheltered from the real world? Because I think all of us having gone to a state school, we can all speak to the fact that it is certainly character building those sort of relationships. And although it's not as much of a friendly environment as private schools, all that can even be debated itself, but just based on that, what do we think about the social aspect of state schools versus private schools?
I still think the benefits of a private school
Outweigh.
I mean, I've
100%.
spoken to people who've gone to private schools. I go to, so my sixth form isn't in Luton, and it's at a status where it's a state school, but it's the same sort of segment of the population that would generally go to private schools. Many of them have gone to private schools for their high school, and they're certainly, the environment is certainly quite private school like. And what you realize is that in the majority of times that doesn't really matter, not to the extent that we perhaps think it does, because when you're out in the workforce in high paying jobs in places of people with power and money, which is where you want to be, the fact that you were at once in a place in a vastly different environment doesn't really matter as much. What matters most is your experience with people who are affluent, your experience with people who have power, your networks and connections, etc. with those people matters much more than your networks and connections and character building with people who come from poorer environments.
That's true.
You want to be accustomed to those better off environments because that's where all the money is inherently. Better off environments have more money, and if you want to be, the fact that you're more accustomed to better off environments isn't much of a disadvantage, I think. It might propose a disadvantage if you decided to work as a secondary school teacher in an impoverished area, in which case it will probably cause a big disadvantage. I had teachers in my secondary school who most likely came from a very different segment of society, and they were not able to teach as well as those who were able to relate to us. So in that case, it probably might have been a disadvantage, but it wouldn't in the majority of cases where you want to be around people of intellect and power and control and affluence. Then you want to be around those people and be familiar with those people. So in that case, I wouldn't say so.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that, it just sort of shows how society is sort of hardwiring that divide from a young age. So if we're talking about what the wealth divide before, the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, it sort of instills those values from a young age. And I have to agree with what Tarek's saying. I don't think necessarily, because even if you look at schools, even if you look at secondary or state schools, they don't really prepare you adequately for any part of society in general anyway. So if you look at state schools, what you experience in school, whether you go to a private school or a state school, will be very different to what you'd experience in society anyway. But like Tarek said, having the benefit of having those connections, etc., the benefits of being in an environment where everyone comes from an affluent background will definitely help you. And also the affluency related to that, oh, I went to this so-and-so private school. So, people are very more likely to assume that you have that knowledge. So I think like maybe if you go to certain state schools, it's not, looked at as much. So I think, yeah, I'd have to agree with what you say there.
That's because, and I think it sort of links to what we were talking about a bit before we started the show, and I believe I was told that you can't be, for example, an anti-capitalist and live in today's world. You can't be an anti-capitalist and own an iPhone and etc. And I completely disagree with that notion. And the reason I completely disagree with that notion is that an inherent part of being an anti-capitalist is saying that this could have happened with or without capitalism. If you're not becoming an anti-capitalist by saying, oh, you know what, I don't like iPhones, I don't like technology, that's why I'm anti-capitalist. No, you're saying, oh, you're anti-capitalist because yes, we have this technology. This would have happened with socialism or any other economic or whatever economic system you propose, but just that it would have happened in a better way and without extra disadvantages. So it's not a rejection of technology to be socialist. It's simply a rejection of the way this technology has come about.
Are you saying we would have had the same technological advances without private property, without competition amongst businesses? Because I certainly think that is quite a contentious issue. Because
I mean, okay, I'll give you the space race. If you bring up the space race, for example, who were the first people to go to space?
Yuri Gagarin in Russia.
Russia. What were they?
Communist.
The first people to first woman in space. The first.
Valentina Tereshkova.
Exactly.
Okay, I get what you're saying.
So
there's nuance. But I still think in general, when we're talking about building a better society with okay, so capitalism breeds competition, and when two businesses are competing,
Not always.
let's say, okay, let's bring it as most simplistic example as possible. Two businesses, exact same product, exact same price. Okay, now for one business to outcompete the other one, they have to reduce their prices, because if they have the exact same product, then they're going to think, okay, they're obviously going to choose either one because the price is the same. So let me reduce my price by a little bit, so then more customers will go to me instead of my competitor.
I don't even think you have to reduce the price.
You can just work in marketing.
Sorry, guys, I'm gonna have to cut you off here. We've got around 15 seconds left. That's a very interesting conversation that we had
maybe
there.
we can continue this next week.
We will continue this debate for sure, listeners. I'm sure you're all eager to listen to our points of view on this topic. But assalamu alaikum. Thank you for listening to us, and we will see you next week.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.